this evening's discussion. Again, thank you all very much for joining us. This is your voice in the community, thought that get results. With regard to your participation in the show, we encourage you to call in on the numbers listed 1-869-469-1616-1700. Here's a suggestion. You have a question or comment, perhaps you can get a pencil, piece of paper, write it down so that you get in the show, you're well organized. We take as little time as possible so we can accommodate as many of you as we can. Also, you can follow us on our YouTube channel for the video streaming of this show or on our Facebook page at Vaughan Radio. Thank you all again for joining us. Your voice in the community, thought that get results. Tonight, Edric W. Stanley, good evening.
Good evening, Webbo. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to the people of St. Kitts, but more particularly the people of Nevis, those who listen to us on Facebook, on YouTube, and on the World Wide Web, as the case might be. Good evening, Webbo. Good evening, Webbo. Good evening.
Conrad Nile Libert, good evening.
Good evening, Webbo, and good evening to my fellow panelists, Mr. Stanley. For all those in tune to this program by the various means and methods, special good evening also to my friends in Connecticut, in Canada, my daughter Makeda. A special good evening to you. Webbo, I'm so happy to be here once again in this beautiful island, and this beautiful evening, Webbo. What can I say other than we truly living in a world of trouble, Webbo. It seems like the Third World War is on its way, and we don't know exactly what region or area it's going to start from, it looks like. I'm happy to be here again, Webbo. Thank you for inviting me.
Tonight, what I would like for us to do, I'd like to get your attention. Now, we know that we've done a couple of years talking about the COVID-19 virus. We've done a lot of information on that. We did a lot of discussions and debates, if you will. In St. Kitts and Nevis and a lot of the other islands, maybe in most cases across the globe as well, the restrictions have been, well, to some degree, a great degree, relaxed. And as a consequence, a lot of people are having their own views as to whether or not the virus is gone away, so to speak, right? Now, we came upon a very important discussion that the BBC had on Sunday, and they had the experts in those particular areas discussing that particular topic. And we thought that it would be important for us to share it with you, listen to what they have to say, and then we can have a short discussion following that, and then, of course, get into some other areas. So we will play that first. We will listen to it, hear what they have to say in reference to the COVID-19 and the status of it at this point in time, and see how it fits in with what we are doing here in St. Kitts and Nevis and across the other islands and across the globe, if you will. Again, we're going to listen to that first, and then we're going to, on the flip side of it, have a discussion.
Hello and a very warm welcome to The Evidence from the BBC. I'm Claudia Hammond, and this series is produced in collaboration with Wellcome Collection, and we're back in their reading room in London in front of a live audience. And today we are returning to the subject of COVID-19. For the first 2 years of the pandemic, it was the topic we looked at in every episode of The Evidence. And in Health Check on the BBC World Service, we've carried on covering new findings, of course. But it tells us something that on The Evidence, it's been a while since we've looked at COVID, and at times it can feel as though it's all gone away. Now, I can hardly believe that this is the third year of this global health crisis, and I catch myself, and I'm sure you do too, becoming numb to the numbers. 6.5 million dead, more than 100 times that number recorded to have been infected, and probably way above that. And if it wasn't for the incredible vaccine rollout, which of course many have yet to benefit from, the death toll would have been much, much higher. And we do so want it all to be over. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, President Biden said that it was. So today we're going to put the emotion and the wishful thinking to one side, and we're going to look at the facts, the evidence. When is a pandemic actually over, and how do we know? And I'm joined today by a really illustrious panel. We have the global leaders in their field who have played key roles in the response to COVID-19, and all of them have joined me on the evidence before. So I'm delighted to have here from Geneva, we have Dr. Maria van Kerkhove, who leads the WHO's work on emerging diseases, and she is an infectious disease epidemiologist. It's a real pleasure to have you on the programme in person, Maria. Thank you so much for coming. And Sir Jeremy Farrar hasn't had to come far from his office because he's based here as Director of Wellcome. And Jeremy is an infectious diseases specialist, and he advised the UK government on their COVID response. And the audience here can see our next guest on the screen, but those of you listening elsewhere should also be able to hear him perfectly. Welcome back to the evidence, Professor Salim Abdul Karim. Now, Salim is co-chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19, and he sits on the Africa Task Force, overseeing the African continent's response to the virus. Now, he's a clinical infectious diseases epidemiologist, and he's talking to us not from South Africa, but from across the Irish Sea in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, where he's addressing a conference. So near and yet so far, Salim, but lovely to have you back on the programme. And I want to start with you, if I can, Salim. What is your reaction to declarations from some quarters that the pandemic is over?
I think we all have a sense of being tired of this virus, being fed up, and we would want it to be over. But unfortunately, the only organization can really call it to be over is the one that called it in the first place, and that's the World Health Organization. I think it's very unwise if we have unilateral declarations of the pandemic being over in individual countries by political leaders. I think this is a much more complex issue that needs very careful scientific assessment.
And Maria, the Director General of the WHO, has said recently that the end may be in sight. I mean, I guess he wasn't saying we're there yet, it's already over.
No, he didn't say that the end is here. He said that the end is in sight. And really what it is a hopeful message. We're not out of the woods yet. It's a global problem requiring global solutions, and the emergency of COVID-19 may be over in some countries because they have been able to use these incredible tools that exist, vaccines that are saving lives, antivirals, diagnostic tests, personal protective equipment, but the access to those tools is not the same everywhere. And the impact of this virus is still killing between 10 and 15,000 people per week. In the last month alone, more than 51,000 people have died from COVID-19. These are deaths that can be prevented. So the emergency is not over. The pandemic is not over, but we're hopeful. We can see that end in sight. We can see what living with COVID will be responsibly. We're just not there yet.
So I wonder if in a way it's just a question of definitions, and that maybe President Biden might not have been using, the strict epidemiological definition, if you like, of what a pandemic is, but a sense that for many, life is back to normal or feels a bit like normal.
Well, it isn't just a matter of definitions. Pandemic is something that covers the entire globe. As the World Health Organization, we declare, the Director General declares a public health emergency of international concern. We actually don't declare the start of a pandemic or even the end of a pandemic. It's very difficult. This virus will be with us, and so we will be dealing with this for many, many years. Doesn't mean we have to deal with it at the level that we're in, but we will declare, the Director General will declare the fake, this public health emergency of international concern, over when it's not an emergency everywhere. And our emergency committee, which was established by the international health regulations, is discussing what the criteria need to be to say we're out of the woods of the emergency at a global level. We don't declare pandemics because what we want to declare is an emergency to prevent us from getting to that in the first place. The public health emergency of international concern was declared on January 30th, 2020. When it was described or characterized as a pandemic, we were in a pandemic. The whole point of the alarm system is so you prevent the pandemic from happening. We weren't able to do that for a variety of reasons, but we characterized it, described it as a pandemic, and I do understand that it's kind of complicated in terms of people's understanding of that, but we will get out of this. That's the point.
And Jeremy, isn't the difficulty that the trouble is we do just desperately want it to be over, don't we? And there are loads of other things to worry about going on in the world as well at the moment. What would you say to leaders who are tempted to say, well, this is mission accomplished?
I think the last US president that declared mission accomplished probably wish he hadn't said it when he said it either. And unfortunately, I think it's got to appreciate that just because you will something to happen, or you want something to happen, or you desperately hope something, it's not quite the same as something happening. And just to reiterate what Slim and Maria said there, I mean, the pandemic, firstly, this infection is with humanity forever. I don't believe the infection is going to disappear from humanity, is personal view. In the streets of London today, about 1 in 60 people are infected.
That's quite a lot, really,
That's
isn't it?
an extraordinary high rate, and that is at the low point of this wave of the COVID pandemic. And we don't yet know the long-term consequences of infection and repeated infections. And I think we've got to use the tools we've got. We've got to make sure that those tools are available in an equitable way to everybody that uses them. And we would be wise to not call the end of a pandemic just because we hope it's coming to an end.
Well, I want to talk some more about this in a moment, but before that, let's see what history can teach us about when pandemics are over. And we're lucky to have here at Wellcome an incredibly rich archive of medical history and the person to help us mine it, who is Ross McFarlane, who is Research Development Lead here. Welcome back to the programme, Ross.
Great, thanks so much, Claudia.
Can we go back 100 years or more to the flu pandemic of 1918 and the years following? And of course that had waves as well, didn't it, in the same way that this pandemic has had waves. Can you remind us about the scale of that earlier pandemic?
Yeah, so just in a sense of scale of infection, the statistics seem to suggest about 500 million people were infected with influenza in 1918, 1919. The death toll was in the realms of 50 million people. Even that number is an estimate from recent research. So it is a huge worldwide issue. And certainly with regard to the idea of waves, when we thought about waves of COVID, the waves of influenza in 1918, 1919, it pretty much dates from March to August 1918 as the first wave, September 1918 to December 1918, which was the most deadly of the waves, the second wave, and the last wave from January to May 1919. So again, the sense of a pandemic rolling around, in the sense of waves travelling around the world at that time.
And how much information was there around at the time about what exactly this was?
One of the issues with regard to how information could be spread out and shared was that there was no overall authority, some global surveillance in the way that exists now with the WHO. So it was very much in ways designed for each country by themselves to work out what to do and pass information on as they saw fit. One of the dangers at the time was how that information was shared. So for example, in Britain, the sense was to be feared of fear, to be frightened of fear. The sense that if people panicked, that would spread the influenza around a lot more. And one of the problems was with that information, Britain as a head of its empire, the colonial office, even though it knew about the first wave, did not pass on information to the dependent countries as part of the empire. So what I've got with me to give you a sense of pandemics coming to an end, in inverted commas, is I've got a volume of the Journal of the American Medical Association from our collections here. This is a letter from a medic in London writing to the editors of the journal in the United States. And it's going from August 20th, and it says, "The influenza epidemic described in recent letters has completely disappeared." So that is the first wave. The second wave is about to arrive. So it's that sense of what records can give to us, the sense of being in the moment and not knowing what the future holds.
And were there voices of caution as well, saying, well, it's not over yet?
Yeah, so in Britain, the responsibilities for looking after local populations was designated down to local authorities. And one particular medical officer of health for Manchester, a chap called James Niven, he actually warned after the first wave, start wearing masks, start closing schools. And he was one of the most prominent of these local officials to try and suggest there was ways to counteract this. And certainly with regards to the dependent countries through the Colonial Office, they shared information amongst themselves. For example, at Sierra Leone, the authorities there told Ghana, told Gambia about what was going on. So word spread in that direction without the advice from the Colonial Office. And they worked very hard at the time to try and stem the flow of influenza.
And so was it ever announced formally, this is now over?
That's a really good question. Because there was not that sort of international surveillance with the WHO, it's almost a case of country by country announces that. And one way of sort of marking that sense is the official reports into the pandemic and how there might be a biological end, the case numbers might decrease, but where a social end happens towards the end of a pandemic can be something very different indeed.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ross. And so coming back to what might happen today, Celine, we were talking earlier about whether the WHO might declare that it's no longer an emergency and that they're meeting every so often to discuss this. It's not just about words, is it? What are the implications if they do say it's not an emergency anymore? What then happens?
I think the principal issue is one of perception and understanding risk, because our ability and willingness to adopt risk-reducing measures like wearing masks and keeping a distance and so on, they are dependent on individuals acknowledging their own risk. And if we say that the pandemic is over, then we basically are saying to people, you're no longer at risk. And if you're no longer at risk, you don't have to take these measures. It also creates a situation where we undermine public confidence in the authorities. If they prematurely declare something is over and then we go through a new wave of infections, what does it say about our leadership that they can't even get this right? So we have to be very careful, because many of the things we do in managing pandemics and epidemics need the public to trust and have confidence in the authorities. Otherwise they won't be part and parcel, they won't buy into the interventions that are needed.
And Jeremy, I wonder if you could have the opposite as well. If it continues being called an emergency for a long time and you continue saying this is very, very serious, and then you don't see big peaks, will people then say, oh, well, you know, you said it's an emergency, but it's not anymore?
Yeah, that's the balance to be struck. But communicating the uncertainty, communicating what we know and what we don't know, and building trust, I would argue, before a crisis hits, is what you depend on when a crisis subsequently hits. It was great to hear that history, and very strong reminder as well. That was 100 years ago. I would bet my bottom pound or dollar, they're about the same now, that there'll be people sitting in this room 100 years from now debating the COVID pandemic. When you look back in 1918 and you hear those stories, it almost feels a little bit romantic, those stories. The truth is, living through history is really hard. It's painful, it's frightening, it's chaotic, it's really difficult to do.
Yes, and Maria, amongst that chaos, I suppose there are practical consequences as well, aren't there? So if an end to the emergency is called, it's not just about words, is it? Other things come into play from that, or stop coming into play.
It does, and I think this idea, this notion of this start and stop is part of the problem. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build pandemic preparedness, readiness, response as a constant. This emergency is not over. I am really sorry to say this, but I think we need to be absolutely clear. There will be further waves of infection. The 1918 pandemic, the virus, that influenza virus, has circulated for decades. The severe disease, the death, that devastation ended, but the virus stayed. this virus, this SARS-CoV-2 virus, is here with us to stay, but it does, so future waves of infection do not need to mean future waves of death, and we have a role to play in that. So what we need is right-sizing the response. We need to calibrate the response going forward. We just recently issued these policy briefs, which is saying, listen, we get this. 3 years into the pandemic, you're tired of talking about this. You're tired of hearing about this. I'm tired of talking about this. I would love to never have to talk about this again, but we have a responsibility to keep people and governments ready. And so we need to calibrate the response. How do you deal with COVID in light of everything else? Every other health crisis and non-health crisis, energy crisis, flooding, droughts, war, displacement, and all of the diseases that were put on the back burner that haven't been dealt with over the last couple of years. This is what scares me the most, complacency. We're tired of this. We don't want to talk about these numbers anymore. We're numb to them. We can't be numb to them. We have to keep fighting. And I'm sorry to use a war analogy, but we have to keep fighting, and we can. So I'm optimistic because I know we can do this. We just have to kind of keep pushing to end this pandemic, end this emergency everywhere.
And Salim, this issue of how to deal with this compared with other diseases, which were neglected for a time, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa during the pandemic, is a really tricky one, isn't it? Because you have got a lot of other diseases to worry about as well, and in other parts of the world too.
So we, in Africa, see something in the region of 8 to 10 different kinds of epidemics. Many of them are small, localized epidemics, but that's just part and parcel of life because we cohabitate this world with viruses and bacteria, and we've got to learn to live with them. Because this virus can infect animals, it can infect dogs and cats and so on, it's going to be with us for many, many years. But what we are getting to at this stage is the end of the first part. I'll just use a broad word of pandemic emergency. This point where people were really concerned and they had to change their lives and couldn't go to work. We're reaching the tail end of the pandemic emergency. We're not over the pandemic emergency because we are likely to see new waves of infection, new variants that can escape immunity, and so we're not yet over the pandemic emergency. But if we can get through that, then we will go through a different kind of period with this virus, where it'll circulate, it'll cause small waves of infections, but it won't cause the devastation that we have seen in the first 2 years of this pandemic.
And Jeremy, there has been amazing global collaboration when it comes to tracking the virus and tracking the changes. And of course, South African scientists shared the details about Omicron with the world, and then we saw what was happening there. Is that information still available? Is everywhere still tracking it and sequencing the virus to find out what's happening?
Yeah, it has been remarkable, and you're absolutely right to pull out Slim and other colleagues that he will be the first to acknowledge in South Africa that alerted the world. So whilst there has been tremendous global cooperation, you're right, we mustn't stop that. And actually I feel at the moment that with the geopolitical situation we're in, that actually we're at one of our most vulnerable points in my professional career, because a lot of that collaboration and cooperation has actually stopped. And there is less sharing of information between certain countries at the moment as geopolitical tensions move out. And what we need to do, in my view, for this is to make sure that WHO is at the centre of it as the global public health body that didn't exist in 1918, and that they are allowed to put politics aside and focus on the technical cooperation that needs to go on to make sure people are sharing what can be shared.
Maria, how much is getting shared now? I mean, there is much less testing in most places going on, isn't there? So
Yeah,
then you haven't got it to sequence.
That's right. There's a big shift in testing policies around the world, and the numbers of tests have dropped precipitously over the last several months. And you can't sequence who you don't test. So sequencing has dropped about 90% since January 2022, when Omicron was first identified and first reported by researchers in South Africa. And that limits our ability to assess and track the known variants. And there are more than 200 subvariants of Omicron that we're currently tracking right now.
200 right now?
200 sublineages of Omicron need to be tracked. So we've gone from several 100,000 sequences available on a weekly basis to 90% less, 10,000 per week. And that limits our ability. I've never been less confident, I have to say, right now, during this entire pandemic, of our ability to assess known variants and identify new ones. Omicron, variant of concern, the dominant sublineage of Omicron right now is BA.5, but we're really concerned about BA.2.75.2. It gets very confusing.
They get longer
and longer, but they're all Omicron and they all have similar characteristics. What our concern is transmission. The next variant of concern will be more transmissible because it has to outcompete whatever's circulating. We don't know if there will be further immune escape, meaning that our body's immune response is not as strong or as robust as it could be going forward. But we don't know if these further variants will be more or less severe. And we have to be ready. So we need the systems that are in place. We need a stronger global health architecture, a stronger surveillance to be able to surge up and surge down. Without surveillance, without sequencing, we're compromised.
So it sounds as though, so that the rest of us can not worry about it all the time, what we do need is scientists worrying about it for us in the background to try to work out what's going on.
That's right.
Now, before we break for the news, I'd like to pin each of you down with when you think the pandemic emergency will be over. Jeremy, what do you think?
I'm glad you're going first.
It doesn't necessarily make it easier being last.
Not in the next 6 months.
Oh, okay. Salim, what do you think?
I think we are likely to see a few more waves of new variants, and I think we're probably looking at within the next 2-3 years or so that the virus will get to a point where it can't really continue to mutate to such big advantages so that it can escape immunity to the same extent.
Maria, what would you say?
We had said in our latest global strategy that we wanted to end the emergency this year. I don't necessarily think we're going to be able to reach that target by December 2022, but we could by December 2023. Maybe you can have us back in the springtime, and we can and you can ask us that again. But one of the things is we just have to remain humble. We have to remain humble to the uncertainty as we go forward, and we need countries to be able to surge up, surge down, and deal with that uncertainty. That's really the goal that we want.
Well, we will see what happens. Thank you very much for the moment. We are breaking for the BBC News now, and thanks to Ross McFarlane for sharing that incredible archive with us earlier. I'll be back with Maria Van Kerkhove, Jeremy Farrar and Salim Abdul Karim after the news, when we'll also be exploring what life might be like living alongside this virus. I'm Claudia Hammond, and I'll be back soon with the evidence from the BBC.
Builders Paradise is offering a large variety of floor and wall tiles at very competitive prices. Builders Paradise has over 2 million pieces in stock, lots of different styles to choose from. Whether you're renovating or tiling a new house, Builders Paradise has what you need. Wow! Oh, and remember, we're open all day Saturday to serve you better. This is something that you can't refuse. Visit Builders Paradise today at the C.A. Paul Southwell Industrial Site in St. Kitts or call them at 466-4938.
Always satisfying. Vaughn Radio, the powerhouse.
And there you had it, the discussion courtesy of the BBC. Edric, you look as if you want to come to the screen at me, as if you're rearing to go. You say what?
It is always important to listen to those who know more than us. Critically important. And I am at a loss to understand why many people propel the argument there is nothing of the sort, meaning the pandemic which existed and the proof was there. But how do we inculcate those who are still in denial that it was real? It's like, but let me not go there. The pandemic was real, is real, and it will continue to be real based on those people we just listened to. All around me, there are people who made statements. And if I was dumb enough to listen to them, I wouldn't be wearing a mask tonight. Localizing it, I was at one of the supermarkets just a few days ago, and a fellow saw me with my mask, and he said to me, "Stanley, you're a strong man. Why are you wearing that still?" I don't remember ever seeing him in a mask, but I said, "Listen, I will continue to wear this mask." And he's trying to convince me that he's right. But you, Webbo, and others know, once I've carved out a position, I will defend it tooth and nail. And in this regard, I told him I will continue to wear my mask, simply because I have listened to those who know more than I know. They have given the instructions, and those instructions I will religiously follow them. So at this juncture, I am saying that clip you just played, coming from the BBC, speaks volumes. And in that regard, I will continue to wear my mask and pay no attention to the many who are misguided. Ultimately, the consequences are there. We have seen, heard, and understood the consequences. Death is the ultimate consequence. And therefore, I want to live. In that regard, I will say, Webbo, it was quite instructive, quite innovative, and ultimately you have gathered the evidence from a panel of experts who are telling us don't follow the politicians simply because they've got their own agenda, and the agenda was predicated on economics to ensure that the countries and peoples continue to produce and ultimately arrive at a certain degree of gross national product. And therefore, they are now attempting to live in denial by leading us down this rabbit hole. I'm not going down there with them. Webbo, I'll be back.
Okay, I'm going to go to Naya for his comment, but just a note here, it might be a light moment, and that is necessary every now and then. You agree with that?
Yes.
And you mentioned that Webbo, as well as others, well know that once you carve out a position, you'll defend it.
Quite so.
And once you had learned something, you learn well.
Quite so.
And as I listen to you, I figure that you're so right. They wouldn't catch you with this, because you had learned well from when you were going to school. Remember the fellows who got you to go up, they got the dumb fellas.
Quite so.
Who got you to go up, they got to Lokango. So. Right? So.
But I learned well and fast.
Right. So nobody who is dumb is going to lead you again.
No.
Okay.
I learned
you learned well. You learned it. So those dumb fellows got you once, and you learned your lesson, and nobody's going to get you.
It was supposed to have gone on for much a longer period of time.
Right. But you, yeah, okay. Naya.
Yes, Webbo, I think the discussion that we just listened to was so important and so relevant to our lives globally, because we know there exists a small tug-of-war between a group who wants to say it's over, but they can't really say it, and those who are responsible for the health of the nations of the world, those who are dealing with the health aspect of the nation of the world, they have a different opinion. Of course, in the politicians' mind, the leaders' mind, they more think of the economy. And sometimes they speak of the economy like an individual, as if it's more important than the lives of real people. But I suppose real people depends on the economy and all that. But during the pandemic, and even in these times, like I listened a documentary, and somebody was simply asking, who's the economy? Where was he or she born? You know, because they give such relevance to the economy, and that it kind of it took over the importance of people's life and people's health. So it's important that we got organization like the World Health Organization, and the piece of history that we just listened to was very important as well, because it also pointed the fact that these things can go on for a while. They're going to be waves and waves, you know. And for those who are close with the responsibility of protecting the people, I think they will continue full time. I am one who feel like it's not over. I don't think it's going to be over in a hurry. But there are a lot of forces over there who would like to give the impression that it's over because they want to make money, I suppose. And I think that tug of war are going to get a little worse going forward, where the airlines now, and everybody wants everybody to get on board, and they want to drop all these restrictions and so forth. The culture of wearing masks is not a bad one at all, I must say. I find myself at times, even though people say, you know, you shouldn't wear a mask, at times need a mask. And I'm sure, you know, having conversation with people as we meet people during the course of the day, even in the banks, and I do ask myself and tell myself that a mask is very important. But we know the Chinese been wearing masks a long time, of course, protecting themselves from air pollution in India, where pollution is, you know. But what I'm saying, the culture of wearing masks is not bad, because recently we also heard of some statistics that saying even the common flu was less prevalent over the last 2 years because of course, one, wearing the mask, and the various practices that we had to undertake to stem the flow of the COVID. I think we should still be very mindful, very mindful, even though some would say we are open for business, think it's a Navy is open for business, and a lot of the developing countries have been impacted so much because their main industry has been destroyed. They're the one who really wants to squeeze out and say it's over. But again, what we just listened to, they mentioned trust. And I think that is one of the things that are holding back the political leaders, because if you say today is over and then next month there is another wave of it, then it looks like your credibility of analyzing the real situation is not very high, and the people are going to say, oh, you don't know what you're saying, you don't know what you're doing. So each is protecting itself, and at the end of the day, individually, we still got to be very mindful. Still got to be with people that works in the hotel, that deal with people who travel from international areas. They got to be very mindful. And I think they should still be protecting themselves, wearing the mask and whatever other protection that is necessary. Because remember, when it hits, we down here, developing countries, we're so dependent on tourism, and we're so dependent upon basically the developed countries that I think if we protect ourselves, as we have been doing, because I think St. Nevis have done well, it would be a very good thing for us going forward. The pandemic is not over, and even though we would like to say that, just like anything else, anything you want to happen, sometimes give you the inclination that is happening. But of course, I'm one who believe, and the people are still very confused, because right now a few people are still getting on well, and they're not even going to be tested because they're saying, well, it's over. That's a bad stance to take, I suppose, you know, because there are still, as we listen from the information just given, there are still quite a number of people who are being infected by the COVID globally and even locally. But I suppose because of the vaccine and whatever other methods they have adapted, we are not seeing the spread and we are not seeing the death and so forth. But it still comes down to very personal practices. If one have that concern, and they should have that concern, because no one want to get sick really, that they should still, when they find themselves in close proximity with people and dealing with people on a daily basis, in big crowds where people tend to come right up in your face to speak to you, it's very important that we protect ourselves. And as I said before, the mass culture is not a bad thing. The mass culture is not a bad thing. It's quite a healthy approach to life, really, with all this air pollution and again, people's personal illness, which sometimes easily transmitted to you by talking to you, by breathing in your face and so forth. The mask culture is not a bad thing, and I personally find myself still reaching for my mask when I'm going out, because it tends to have that degree of protection in some way or the other. It personalizes something about you, and it personalizes something about the other person as well. And so there is that barrier, which I think still should be existing at this point, Webbo.
Yeah, I found it, as I said, and I'm glad that you, at least the both of you, found it useful. And I thought that based on our commitment to the society, that we should try and, it is not the kind of sexy thing that people probably will want to hear about, you know what I'm saying? But I thought it was very important, and the points that were made in that a lot of the decisions that were made to done away with these things were political decisions for varied reasons. But that doesn't translate into the fact that it has gone away. And, I think Naya made the point that perhaps more personal responsibility now should be taken aboard by everyone, because we're very vulnerable nations, societies, and it is not enough if something happens to lay blame. It doesn't solve any problem, and it doesn't make the COVID go away. So once you get the facts, and the other point what I find is interesting as well, the point that Edric made, just like when the pandemic was in full bloom, or the virus, and then you had people arguing on varied side of the issue to persuade one way or the other, to the extent that some said it didn't even exist. For someone to accost Edric because he made a personal choice, he's going to wear his mask, and this person is trying to persuade him, you're either weak or something, you shouldn't wear your mask. So you're going to get that is continuing. I don't know what our health experts will be saying, but as I said, we put it out there. People could listen, make their own decisions and evaluations. And I like the point, for instance, that Naya made when he said large gatherings, for instance, is one of those reasons why you might want to wear a mask, consider, and and so on. So, as I said, put it out there, heard the information, and let's see someone perhaps want to weigh in as well. Let's see. Good evening. Let's see. Okay, caller, I'm very sorry. I think I made an error there. Could you please call back? We'll get you on the air. Okay, we'll take your calls at 469-1616 or 1700 if you'd like to weigh in on the discussion. Meanwhile, Stanley, you wanted to come back in?
Yes.
Okay, the caller is back, so let's deal with the caller first, and then we come back to you. Thank you for holding. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Webbo.
Yes.
And good evening, Mr. Stanley and Noel. If anyone else there, good evening.
Good evening.
Now I'm listening here good. And Webbo, each one of you on the panel, your comment makes a lot of sense. But now, Webbo, here is my knowledge. Now, if any one of you there are what you call hunters in the mountain, you're going to hunt animals. So you have to have a gun. And you decided, well, okay, I have enough meat home. So I'm going to need no more meat for the rest of 5 years or a year. And you're going in the mountain, so you don't want no animal to shoot. So you're only going with your defensive weapon. You're going to be the bare hands. It will be foolish to go in the same jungle where they go hunt wild animal to eat, to go in there without your gun, because you do not know what you're going to meet up in there. And you do not know what's going to attack you. So it's always best to walk with your guard and your shield to protect yourself, because you do not know what's coming your way. That's my analogy.
Okay, thank you. The other thing that's probably is noteworthy, again, I'm no health expert. What we do, we are just putting the views and the suggestions and the observations on the table. But I am detecting that there is a flu going around. Some people are doing a lot of coughing, some people have to be staying at home and stuff like that. And there is still a debate also going around that we don't have COVID. And there is a debate that some of those cases may well be COVID.
Yeah.
But because we, in terms of our official status or policy, is to basically done away with most of the protocols that we were doing. Somehow it is ingrained in our brain that it doesn't exist. And so therefore it is okay to let your defense down. Mr. Stanley?
Well, Webbo, I think you have fulfilled your managerial or corporate responsibility to the community for having brought to the fore the full brunt of the awareness, to the extent that you have recorded it and now you have amplified it through the microphone or the broadcasting system of Vaughan Radio. And I'm hoping that tonight people would call one another and explain to them that this important topic is being discussed, and for them to arm themselves with the knowledge that it is not over simply because some people in higher up may have said that it is over, but it is not over, because based on the information that came out from the broadcast, there are several variants, and they come in different ways. And in that regard, this wave may not attack you, or this variant may not attack you, but at some point in time, if you let down your guard, it is very likely that you can be affected, infected, and ultimately die from whatever that variant may be.
The other thing that is also important is, at least a couple of weeks ago, I did not follow up on it as closely as in terms of current, but you know, they had developed a vaccine which was designed to protect persons against the known variants of the COVID-19, so and the future variants. So that is one of the new vaccines that have been developed, and I think the latest that I got, it was suggesting that in the United States it probably was going to be ready for distribution and inoculation by the flu season or something like that, we probably can follow up on it. And maybe I need to get back in touch with Dr. Thwaites and get our sessions back on, so that people, it never hurt to have the information, because information is power, and by that you can accomplish a whole lot of things. And a fellow used some of my words against me that I normally use. He said to me today in a conversation, he said, "Webbo, you must always remember, it's you who keep reminding us words are a powerful thing." Yes, Naya.
Yeah, we shouldn't drop the ball. I mean, we're heading into the tourist season again right now. This is October, November is coming up. So we're dealing with people from different areas of the world where the pandemic is still happening. It is still happening, and so we just cannot drop our guard at this point in time. I'm surprised that we have not been hearing anything, because when you listen to this report that you played, Webbo, you realize how important that was and is for people to listen to, and I want to congratulate you for having to, take note of that and rebroadcasting it, because it makes me wonder if our local team did not find it relevant to brief the people still. I have not heard from them for a while.
And might I, excuse me, Naya, but might I add to the point that you made in reference to the tourism and people traveling, one of the things we have to note with that is that the restrictions that were put on a year or two ago have now been lifted.
Yes.
So that people are now traveling, and whereas a year ago you were screened.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were working in the hotels or wherever you come in contact with tourists who are traveling, you reasonably knew that these persons had a test.
Yes.
And so the probability of them having was much lower.
Yes.
Now everybody is traveling around,
yeah, mm-hmm,
without being tested, etc. So is it possible then that the risk goes up?
It goes up. And
it's very possible. And basically, we have to take precautionary measures and understand that the science and scientists who are engaged in fighting this pandemic have done us a marvelous amount of good. I'm talking about the world population, by sharing their information and findings and recommending that actions must be taken, and those actions have paid off handsomely to the benefit of the world. Now the leaders, political leaders, have to do a balancing act, and those who might be listening to this broadcast must become fully aware that they owe that responsibility to the nation and its peoples, to the nations and their peoples, that they have an economy which would provide jobs, but also that economy is dependent on a healthy population. And if your population is unhealthy, that population will become unwealthy. So they got to do what is known as a balancing act with reference to understanding their responsibility to the people, to their people, and look at the economy on the one hand, and look at this pandemic, all the variants, Omicron or whatever they are called, and make a decision that they cannot just come out and make a statement that would unmask, unsanitize, recalibrate the distances, those protocols that were in place must be put back in place, but at the same time, they have to walk this tightrope and do a balancing act so as to keep the nation and their peoples going upward and onward.
And to be fair though, maybe what we can do is move to a different phase whereby in the first 2 years or so, the politicians and the health officials, authorities, they were basically managing, micromanaging, if you will, and they did a good job. The pandemic is still on, so maybe we just move to a different phase whereby the responsibility now is just put more on the onus, is put more on the individuals, because I think what our position is that the mask, for instance, is optional, right? So that if the society, individual by individual by individual, and then the whole society decide that I think I'm going to still use the mask, right? That has proven to be very effective. Yes. But there is no mandate from the authorities, but individual responsibilities. And people figure, well, okay, it's just like you may go out in the rain, and some people might say, well, okay, well, I go in the rain, ain't anything gonna happen. But the majority of the people take some rain gear, right? They're not forced to. They take some rain gear. So, you know, to me, it can be that we come to that stage where we now garner the individual responsibility, and we add it one by one by one by one, and then all of a sudden, collectively as a society, we do it. And as a result, we're safer. No?
Yes, Webbo. It's a consciousness, really. You know, and also in the midst of all this, Webbo, you know, one consciousness that I thought should have grown and developed is your own personal immune system too. I believe since the pandemic, people should just become a little more conscious of the things they eat, consume, and about the immune system in ways, and think of ways to strengthen the immune system, because you can't leave that out. If you live in carelessly, not eat properly, you're not thinking about the health of your body, you are susceptible to a lot of things, you know. And of course, I believe throughout all this, that consciousness should have been risen, should have risen in some way, whereby people just do the things and eat the things, drink the things that promote the immune system, really, you know. So again, that is on a personal level. So yes, I agree with you, Webbo. Personal responsibility, I suppose, kick in greatly now, because the economy have to run, and we got to function within the economy. And for those who are exposed to, you know, people coming from all over the world, they are basically on the front line. They need the job. The economy needs, you know, the function of everyone. So I suppose it really comes down to a personal concern, your personal health, even more so now than before, because the people are coming, the hotels are open, and you want work.
Okay, so I just thought we will do that.
Great.
You know, this evening. I'm encouraging folks that if you didn't get it, you can listen to repeat tomorrow. You can go to our YouTube channel or Facebook page and hear the discussion from the experts. And you know, as I said, we thought that in terms of our responsibility, but in the society, that we will do that. We hope that you appreciated it. So we'll take a break and we'll come back. We got other things perhaps we'd like to speak about. We'll do exactly that right after this. This is Talk That Get Results. Edric W. Stanley, Conrad Nye Liber. Your phone calls on 1-869-469-1616 and 1700. Be back after these.
With With all the power from the tower, this is the powerhouse of the Eastern Caribbean, VON Radio, from the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Builders Paradise is offering a large variety of floor and wall tiles at very competitive prices. Builders Paradise has over 2 million pieces in stock, lots of different styles to choose from. Whether you're renovating or tiling a new house, Builders Paradise has what you need. Wow! Oh, and remember, we're open all day Saturday to serve you better. This is something that you can't refuse. Visit Builders Paradise today at the C.A. Paul Southwell Industrial Site in St. Kitts or call them at 466-4938.
Back on this episode of Thought That Get Results with Conrad Nye Liber, Edric W. Stanley. Your phone calls on 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. On to perhaps other areas, right? Of late, we've been having some troubling situations. The tragic stabbing death yesterday, and recently another fatal stabbing, and so on, and then a couple of shootings and stuff like that, and so on. We can hardly afford that in this very fragile society, right?
Quite so, Webbo, and this is one of the things I was trying to tell now before we got in the air, that we've got the security forces and we have the government as an entity. Those are two powerful forces that must keep our nation on even keel. But there's a third entity, the bad boys, where what you just said would dovetail into my comment. If this force, well, let me not say if, because it should not gain traction as it has gained in Haiti. And that force is so destructive, where people take unto themselves the law into their own hands, create a power base, and ultimately rule. It is dangerous, and we cannot allow this to go on. At the same time, we have to depend on our security forces and our government leadership to ensure that that particular dangerous force, gang violence, gang accumulation of power, which can be at a certain level that would challenge the civility of our nation. And at this time, I would say that we have to be very, very mindful of the topic of not last week, but the one before, which was a very good topic, and you had Webbo in Baha'u'llah, Naya, and Glendale. Now I recognize that the Honorable Mark Brantley, Dr. Brantley now, has brought on board the collaboration of the administration, federal administration, that has reached out to the legal arm of the Nevis Island administration for them to, in fact, collaborate with the expectation of doing something with reference to the Constitution in terms of through the legislative process. And like I've said in the past, I am not a secessionist, and therefore Nevis and St. Kitts, in terms of going forward, has as a nation better days ahead, or best days are ahead of us. And as a result, I'm saying to those who are propelling the idea of secession, it's an old relic. It's not going to happen. And I am at the ground level, and I've been speaking to people, and as I recognized that, Webbo, you try to equate the constitutional arrangement to a cricket match, which is in fact not a bad idea, but the framers put in there a safety catch of 66 2/3%, and until they reached that, those are the rules of that particular game. And therefore, Naya coming in with this thing of as an old relic, I guess he probably picked it up through the blood of his father, and again attempting to bring to the fore. I am happy, based on what I've heard, that the Attorney General, Garth Wilkin, has reached out to the Nevis Island administration through its legal arm for them to attempt to recondition or amend the Constitution through the legislative process. And I hope that will be the death knell once and for all.
You know what they're going to amend it to say?
Almost.
What?
There are several things that need
well,
to be
well, let us know. You said you know. Tell us what it is, because we don't know. Well, I don't know.
Well,
so tell us. Tell me.
But one of my first things is to ensure that we get either a clause in for St. Kitts for them to go when they want, or we take out the clause.
So that's one of the things that they're going to amend it to say?
We're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Oh, okay. But I just check in.
We're not there yet.
I just check in because
we're not there yet.
But
because you see,
before we get there, then you were mentioning something earlier before you went on to this secession, right? You were talking about the government and then the security forces, and then you said there's another factor, right? Bad boys, you remember that?
Quite so.
Well, the last incident involved two young ladies. And the other, the couple of them that we heard earlier, another stabbing and stuff like that. So, just like when we had the first segment and we put the information on the table from the authorities and the officials, I like to be responsible and do that, because when something happens, I try to follow closely. Sometimes they say, well, the investigations are continuing, and then you never hear anything else. But that's why it's important to solve problems and crime, so we can know exactly what happened. Because if something happens and we just say, well, oh, it's so and so be the case, we can be dead wrong. You agree with that?
Quite so.
Right?
We shouldn't speculate.
Right. So we got to be careful with that. And then I think I have addressed the point that you made in reference to this arrangement of changing the Constitution. What your answer has satisfied me that I don't need to go any further with that, at least yet. So maybe we'll just ask Naya if you want to weigh in on anything.
Yes, Webbo.
Sorry, Naya. The thing with the cricket match and what he just referred to, I don't think I need to. Maybe for the next 10, 15 years, I don't think I have to add, because I gave him a run for about 20 years now, you know, before I answered.
Yeah.
And now I realize that he's on the run, so I don't have to address that again till maybe when he catch himself in the next 15, 20. Go ahead, Naya.
Webbo, I'm going to come back. You
No, Webbo, it seems like the epidemic of this violence that we experienced 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's not over. It's not over. The solutions that was brought forward to prevent it was monetary, and I believe this thing goes much deeper than that. I was always one who never thought paying the criminal was a solution. I hope we are not going to be experiencing that major upsurge in crime and violence again here. But it's there, and I believe, you know, if the new government doesn't look at that carefully and try to deal with it, maybe it can raise its ugly head again.
But here's my question, though. I keep wondering and asking if it is just one group or set of people. And that is why I pointed out this last case. He said bad boys. But the last case says 2 young women. And then what do? You ignore that fact and then class it under the broad umbrella of bad boys.
No,
what I want to know, if it is not the society that overall is just hostile and reaching a stage where people, for whatever reason, are settling problems in a particular way, whether you're a bad boy, good girl, or somebody who just get upset. You reach a stage where, you know, Edric referenced Haiti, and then in Jamaica they have something they call vigilante justice. You know, this thing didn't happen overnight.
No,
it's a system of justice that the people think has failed them, and so at some point they say it didn't make sense, go to the police, and everybody decide to take the justice in their own hands.
A lot that's going on, Webbo. We got serious problem, systematic problem, I believe, in terms of trust, and the attendance onto crime. At times, you know, sometimes a lot of prejudice come to those avenues, really, and people just doesn't feel safe, and people just doesn't feel like their concern is taken seriously at times, you know. Let's don't play blind eye and think that everything is the way it should be, really. I mean, the police are individuals, and at times they themselves act unlawful and at the same time in a discriminating way. But I'm not blaming the police at all, you know. But I think we're dealing with a kind of a subculture where the adverse things becomes okay, adverse reactions sometimes become okay, and you know, it's not just bad boys, it's bad girls too. Cause the boys them have girls, and enough time the girl them is who firing up the bad boys, you know. But again, it's a new government, and you know, we've been dealing with this from a long time, and the past government had found a way. They think they had found a way to solve this problem, but I never thought, you know, that was a proper way of dealing with this thing. So I think the present government is still responsible, and they are close with that task of getting rid of that subculture that does exist, and everybody's so people handing their gun. Rude boys don't hand in the gun. They might hand in one and hide two. You know, and so we are still threatened by that. We are still threatened by that in our society, to be quite honest. Still threatened by that in a big way, because trust me, Webbo, if I got to pay you to stop commit crime, the minute I can't pay you, or anything that gets in the way of that, maybe even the change of a government, because you know that was also based by a lot of personal hands out and all kind of things. You know, we are not doing things properly in Webbo, and it's gonna bust through the seams.
The other thing today also, I think there was news of a big drug bust on a boat in St. Kitts. And you know, big. I think it's a story that's still breaking. And so when you put all these things together, and by the way, you know, when you listen to the news too, some of the other islands are having the similar issues that we are having as well. I think in might have been Tortola, the BVI, the other day, it had a fatal stabbing as well. And you know, in reference to the stabbing, I have said that it's not just the guns, getting the guns out of the street and stopping the guns and them from coming in. This thing is how people are wired.
Yeah.
If a person get to that degree of anger, and he feels he wants to take somebody out, and he doesn't have weapon A,
he's weapon B or C.
You see? Anyhow, if you would like to weigh in on the conversation, you can call 1-869-469-1616 or 1700. And also, if you have anything else you'd like to touch on.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to Mr. Stanley quite briefly, because I'm not sure I want to get too deep into this, about the legal department, the Attorney General in St. Kitts making contacts with the Nevis legal department. There's obviously a case that is ongoing right now, which there was a ruling that says that the island administration cannot be sued, and they can't sue. It's an ongoing case right now. And in light of that, I think Premier Brantley did ask the legal department to come together to try and solve that circumstance that exists.
Okay, Naya, let's see if we can get this, and I'll come back to you. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Good night, brother, and good night, Stanley, and good night, Naya.
Good night, sir.
Good night.
Webbo, you're so right. Society just hostile. You understand? Nobody could talk to nobody. Everybody just feel like themselves with it. You just 13, 15, 14. You feel like you're your own man and woman. And just because of the bringing up of the parents them. And some of the parents them do not pay much attention to the children them. This two case we had on here with these two young girls, you know, is parents who neglect the children, you know. The two of them neglected, you know. One of them chose the one because she got a child, and one of them moved out, left the children them, and gone to live with somebody else. And this is the thing. We don't no longer 6 children, and left them in a home by themselves, and gone to live with them and left them on their own responsibility. Who going to take care of them? And this is the thing that society got to face, and we got to face. So it just has to, because nobody looking out, you know, long term. You also got the grandma, the grandpapa helping looking out. Grandpapa and grandma now, them are young people. Who concern, whatever, is me and you got to concern about these things, because they can get to us. Because when parents don't bring up the children, the mini where it's supposed to come up. That's the situation we can always get, and society will always get out of hand. Anyway, I will continue listening to the program. Good program.
Okay, thank you for that bit of information as well. You know, you see that is interesting. You hear what he says, the last case involved. You see what I'm saying? And then it speaks again to the overall society. Right? And I don't know why we don't want to say it, but we have a very hostile society.
Yes.
Very hostile.
Yes, I find that.
There's a program
yes.
which is here every Tuesday morning. Parenting.
Of society.
And one of the dissertation in parenting came from Mrs. Manners. And I'm just going to give in a nutshell. If you try to, it's like raising a child, and it's like a bar of soap. If you hold it too hard, too firm, it slips away. And if you don't apply the right amount of guidance, or let me say, if you are too soft, then the child comes up
Slip away.
differently. Parenting. Nearly every morning I listen to this. Every Tuesday morning I listen to this program on the Great One Radio, hosted by Webbo Herbert. And that is something I take very seriously.
You mean One Radio managed by me, but the program is by the Methodist
Church.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very interesting program, and this is to somewhat bring on into the fore, or to the fore, what the fellow was just saying about parents. Parents do try, but sometimes the children are unmanageable. They get information from their peers through school and through other means of communication. There is social media. Now is a new avenue through which they get information and communication. There was a story in the BBC where a 14-year-old committed suicide, and the father continues to blame himself simply because the child was on maybe Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, as the case might be. And he said he never knew what was going on that social media platform. And he has now gone nationwide, wound up in Silicon Valley, to tell Zuckerberg and those people who are the owner of these media platforms that they're responsible for some content in their communication system that should be removed or be reprogrammed. So we are in an era where it becomes a little more difficult to bring up children the way we expect them, because nobody wants his or her child to become a problem in society. But if they lack the necessary tools or education, as the case might be, guidance, they themselves, they will eventually misguide their children, not deliberately, but children have a mind of their own, many of them, and no matter what you tell them, they just want to do completely the opposite. I spoke to a gentleman at one time, and he told me his son does the opposite to what he tells him. That's devastating.
But that seems simple enough to me.
Okay, Webbo.
If he does and always does opposite.
Just give and convert it.
Okay. You don't need a rocket scientist to figure that one out. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Yeah, Webbo, very short and simple. Webbo, this behavior is global. It's a global culture now. And the only thing could stop this is a change of heart and a change of mind from the Creator. That's all I have to say, Webbo. Have a good night.
Yeah, okay. Now, let's go.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up with Mr. Stanley. Mr. Stanley is always quick to suppress the idea of secession, but that's okay. I respect that. But Mr. Brantley did make mention of the legal department in the federal administration having, some meetings with the local legal department, and I think it was based on an issue which is basically a ruling of the court that says that Nevis Island administration cannot sue or cannot be sued. Well, we know in the past that they have been doing this. They have been suing.
Okay, now let's interrupt you again.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for holding. Good evening.
Webbo, I forget to tell you this. You do know the amount of people go to church and religiously on a Sunday. They go in the walls of the church with malice, evil, and all kind of wickedness in the heart. And they come out to the church with more upon that. What they went in there for? To the what? It make no difference. So they may as well stay home and be like the man who don't go to church and go off with the dice and go anywhere and do the gamble. Because they go in the church and they ain't no difference. They still full up the heart with malice and evil and hatred, especially for politicians. And that ain't supposed to be. So let them get that straight. Thank you, Webbo.
Okay, Naya.
Yes, and so the judge ruled that the island administration cannot be sued and they cannot sue. And so it was necessary for the legal departments of the federal and the local legal department to meet to discuss the matter, because it's a very, very, very serious matter. Because to me it will totally take away any kind of autonomy that the island administration have. I mean, we know that the island administration have sued in the past, and to hear a ruling just recently that they cannot be sued or they cannot sue, and only the Governor General can be sued on behalf of the island administration. It's quite troubling.
The Attorney General.
Oh, sorry, the Attorney General. It's quite troubling for Nevis, and that's why the legal departments are meeting. They are not meeting to adjust nothing in the Constitution. And I just want to say, any politician in Nevis who wants to collaborate with the federal administration to remove the 113 clause, I think their political life is over in Nevis. They would never ever get my support again. None of them. I don't care which party they come from, because that would be not just a slap in the face of Nevisian. That's death, basically, for Nevis people. That represents some hope for Nevis. It was not put there by mistake, okay? And I walk the street of Charlestown, and everywhere I go after these programs, and I speak towards secession, and I'm always congratulated. And there are a lot of people out there who think quite different to you, Mr. Stanley, as it relates to Nevis being independent, politically independent of St. Kitts. And so we will go on. I will go on with my campaign. And but one point I want to make: whatever had stirred up this thing in Nevisians about want to secede from St. Kitts still exists.
It will always exist.
And so you cannot say that this is a thing of the past when these shortcomings that makes Nevisians suffer still exist. And so we're looking at solutions. And of course, the political independence, I think it's quite a solution, and I'm not ignorant about it, A lot of people think I'm thinking about this thing can happen next year and these type of stuff. No, No. But if we have an objective for Nevis, I suppose we are quite different, because you know what struck me the other day? It looks like some of Nevis people is more interested in the Federation than St. Kitts people, because I also realized too, a lot of people in St. Kitts understands Nevis' quest for secession, because if St. Kitts was in Nevis' position, they would have been going about this vehemently to secede, you know. And so they understand. It's just we over here to gather the strength and confidence in each other and work together and make Nevis a better place. Because I don't see Nevis existing under St. Kitts that we'll ever realize half of our potential. We will just always blame St. Kitts, and I don't see Nevis really. We will continue to suffer because St. Kitts literally sucks Nevis in every aspect of existence, really. We may think we might find ourselves in a position where we need the money, and who's to blame for that, I suppose? Maybe the leaders of Nevis, by not keeping Nevis in a prepared state or moving towards a prepared state. No, Mr. Stanley, I think I am not alone in this. I'm not alone, and there is quite that consciousness still exists. And let me say, if this court case holds that the island administration can't sue and cannot be sued, it's over for us. It's absolutely over. And I don't want to hear that that's the state of affair. And I think the case have gone to the Privy Council, gone somewhere to a higher court.
Yeah, but let me just give you, gentlemen, a gentle reminder, right? That same court made a decision on a ruling in 2015, and then it went to the Privy Council.
Yes.
And then we know what happened.
We know what happened. So we expect.
I wouldn't say it, you know, it's good, but I'm just saying in terms of process and.
But very important stage of affair, right?
Right, because had it not gone to the Privy Council, St. Kitts and Nevis would have been at different place at this current juncture, right? Because that same court made a particular decision.
Yeah, I might have to go all into
and we carried that. Remember, Edric, we carried that thing live from the Privy Council.
Yes.
And the law lords tore that thing apart.
And nobody questioned it.
Right, tore it apart in terms of things. So let's just wait and see. When I said I'm not saying to end your discussion, I'm just putting that in. As a point of, putting some information on your desk. Good evening, thank you for holding. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Hello, good evening. I totally agree with Naya. Nevis really not going to go any place with St. Kitts. We're not going to see our true potential once we are in this federation thing. The history of Labour and Nevis. Labour has never treated Nevis fairly. Under the Thatcher government, under the Douglas government. So my question to you guys, do you think that we're going to be treated any differently under this new labor regime? I don't think so. I don't see it happening, because I don't think that the labor culture has really changed. When you have people like Douglas who's still in the government and have treated Nevis, bounced Nevis check and treated Nevis like dirt. I mean, I really don't see us going any place with this labor thing. So I totally agree with Naya. We need to do what we got to do, and we need to unite. And if St. Kitts was in our position, they would have done that a long time. They wouldn't tolerate all the nonsense that we tolerate. So I'd like to hear Edric Stanley's opinion on this. Do you think that under this labor regime we're going to be treated any differently? I'm going to listen off here.
Okay, Edric Stanley.
Hope springs eternal. And that is just to put a large caption. I am saying we are dealing with people, and as we evolve as a human being, as a society, it is very likely that we would be able to change the minds of the newcomers. These are different people who are now leading the Labour Party, and it has been said that they will attempt to accommodate Nevis or the Nevis Island administration, and again, hope springs eternal. But I brought to the fore something in the past, the Honourable Joseph Parry and the late Vance Amory, two concreted positions in the districts, St. Thomas's and St. George's. And if you were to look at the relationship between the two leaders of the two parties, at some point in time, they would say, let's divide Nevis. Vance, you take.
Let me just take this and then we'll come back to you. Thanks for holding. Good evening.
Yeah, Mr. Stanley.
Yes.
I think you need to listen carefully what the caller before me, the last caller before me said, you know. He said, remember he called somebody name, said they're still in the party, you know. So if the party was all new members, then I would agree with you. But once you got what you call an old subject still in your party, you expect anything. Because you remember he go back from way back and come up to now, you know. So Mr. Stanley, diagnose and assess what you heard him said carefully, and then you make a decision.
Well, he has not brought in as many dynamics as he should have. And as a result, I cannot agree with him, even though we've got an older.
Let me just take this. Good evening, thank you for holding your point right there. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Herbert. Good evening to the panelists, Mr. Stanley, Mr. Herbert, and good evening to the listening public. Mr. Stanley, good evening.
Good evening.
I heard you say, and I keep hearing other people saying, that we need to put a clause 113 in the Constitution for St. Kitts. And I am a little slow. Could you tell me to what end? What would you achieve by that?
Is to bring about equity, balance, and it doesn't mean that St. Kitts would attempt to execute that clause simply because the dynamics are different, but you have to bring everything to the table, discuss it, and ensure that all parties to the conflict or to the arrangement.
Mr. Stanley, St. Kitts have got the handle right now. That clause is what brings equity or some sort of semblance of control, check and balance. For Nevis being the lesser party, and we've been treated that way all along. What is the reason for St. Kitts to have the handle, and you're going to give him you're going to give them another clause, more handle? That is what I want to understand.
Well, the reason why I just suggested that is because some people are saying if St. Kitts were in Nevis's position, without bringing the small size geographically, the smaller population, the smaller buying power, And a lot of dynamics, a lot of factors must be brought into the equation if you're going to give St. Kitts.
With all the dynamics that you think must be brought into the occasion, you go around thinking, making decisions by what people say?
Well, it depends on what the circumstances are, and that's a hypothetical.
You are a figurehead in this community. You see, which party be on a panel with heavyweights. Please do not be swayed by what people say. When you're gonna come to the public with information, please come with something that you could stand behind.
Okay, Connor.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, thank you for holding. Good evening, you're on the air.
Hey, Webbo, good evening, man. How are you doing?
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks.
Yes, go ahead, please. Don't listen to your computer. Listen to the phone.
Yeah, man. I'm here trying to digest what Stanley spitting out there. I don't understand Stanley at all. I mean, it baffles the mind the kind of information that he tried to disseminate here. It doesn't make no kind of sense. Naya is 100% right. And I understand where they're coming from. Naya got a history. Naya came with a family with that history. We all came with the families with that history behind us. And you cannot talk about anything in St. Kitts News without putting a historical context on it. And for the life of me, I don't understand where Stanley is going. I don't know where he's coming from. It's just, and then he up there on this program here, to me he just basically stalling and misinforming people. I don't understand it. I really can't understand it. My God. All right, man.
Okay.
You think the result in the last referendum was misinformation for the people when the rules of the game was 60 to 12% and it didn't reach to that threshold? I didn't make those numbers. The people participated and those numbers were real.
Good evening, thank you for holding.
Yeah, good night again, Webbo. Okay, you know that St. Kitts News in the federal part of the government. Do news pay tax to the federal government? Webbo?
If Nevis pay tax to the federal government?
Yeah, if Nevis pay tax to this, okay. The tax we pay the Nevis through the federal tax, like all the tax them like we claim to Nevis, all of them come in the treasury down here in St. Kitts, Nevis hold their own tax when they get their own tax.
The short answer to that would be there's some of the taxes that are paid in Nevis that are generated in Nevis that are held by the NIA, and I think there are some of the taxes that are generated from operations in Nevis that are paid in St. Kitts. I don't know if that answers the question.
Okay, what I want to say, right? Now, Nevis in a federal government with St. Kitts, right? And if I believe they get support from the federal government with whatever tax pick up from the federal, it goes to Nevis. Don't you think that if the government, the NIA perform and bring in more project and do more things and collect tax from St. Kitts still, collect tax from the federal government, and they got their own tax because they bring in project and they turn over the project into whatever they want to do, and do not, because it be better still to go on their own. Because if you're getting money from the federal levels and you go on your own now, Nevis go on their own, you're going to be scrambling to Nevis to find investment, they're scrambling to find this and find that, and I don't think Nevis is the main industry, like tourism, like the main industry in Nevis. So I see it difficult right now to Nevis to go on their own. I don't know whether you live after. You understand? But I believe with the federal government, they could go out and look investment, look with the project and the case different things. You have now a different administration in Nevis. And it worked, especially on the PAM. With the federal, because remember on the PAM, when I think was not Daniel, Carl told us that 1980 when PAM got in power, Nevis not the water, Nevis not this, Nevis not that. And Chupam, with the federal government Chupam, all these things created Nevis. So, in a picture that, you're ticklish thing to me is to go on their own right now. I don't think they will force that with the right hand out in the world right now, economically. Alright then, I come to do it.
Yeah, okay.
So this the caller called and attempting to tell me that he doesn't understand where I'm coming from. He has not evaluated the rules of the game in the Constitution. It was placed, the Constitution was given to us. That's the rule book. Clause 113 was put in there, and the umpire, which is 66 2/3%, declared that the secessionists did not meet the threshold. I didn't make up those rules.
What did they meet? What did they put up?
What the percentage they achieved?
62 somewhere in that region.
Good.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
So, based on the rule book of clause 113 in terms of the threshold, they failed. Give me another timetable as to when this will come again, and I can tell you it will fail also, and has nothing to do with Edric Stanley. It has something to do with the framers of the Constitution, who, based on what I'm hearing through the grapevine, not officially, that it was put there not to be used, and as a consequence.
So it was put there so that Nevis will never get on its own? That's what you're suggesting?
Look.
You're suggesting it was put there based on what you say you learn, so that Nevis will never get on its own?
Nevis is on its own in a sense.
Good evening, thank you for holding.
Hello, good evening, Webbo. This is for Mr. Stanley again. Mr. Stanley.
Yes.
Are you saying that when you put the clause 113 in the Constitution for St. Kitts, you will have a 66 2/3 majority for the threshold as well?
I don't know.
How do you mean you don't know?
How could I tell you? Sit here and tell you.
Well,
that's a hypothetical you're throwing at me.
What is this?
That's a hypothetical.
Are you pushing it?
No, I'm not pushing anything.
Are you appending?
Callers called and said maybe if it was St. Kitts in Nevis's place, St. Kitts would have gone, and I'm saying to the callers, simply because I deal with numbers.
Mr. Stanley, have you given this thing a thought for yourself and stop telling me about what callers say?
I have looked through.
Have you given this thing a thought for yourself?
Yes.
Good. What threshold are you going to put?
I can't sit here and tell you.
You can't tell me?
No. Simply because I don't have all the...
You're putting yourself, yourself in a kind of position.
No, I'm saying to you, I don't have all the specifics regarding the makeup of St. Kitts Nevis.
Mr. Stanley, I would strongly suggest before you start peddling this thing, right, get it right first.
No, I'm not peddling anything.
Thank you.
What I'm trying to tell you, historically, Nevis and St. Kitts were physically joined. That is based on evidence, physical evidence. The Captain Craft tells you that the depth of the water between St. Kitts and Nevis is 25 feet. That came out in a study.
So, in that regard, walk with me. In that regard, do you know that Russia and Ukraine were physically joined?
Same land.
Physically joined?
That is correct.
So, therefore, what?
England and Scotland.
Walk with me. So, therefore, Ukraine belongs to Russia?
No.
Okay. But, so, if St. Kitts and Nevis... Walk with me. So, if St. Kitts and Nevis were physically joined, that means what?
We look at the history based on written information, and we look at the physicality, geopolitical.
Yeah, walk with me. I don't have a lot of time. You're making a point that St. Kitts and Nevis were physically joined. Therefore what?
At this particular juncture, I am saying to you, leave it alone.
Leave it alone. So, if Russia and Ukraine were physically joined, give Ukraine to Russia?
No.
Okay.
Simply because the war has been predicated on the current circumstances where Russia, which was part of the Soviet Union, USSR, and ultimately Ukraine got its independence based on the World Rule Book. So don't mix up apples and oranges, Webbo.
I'm not mixing up apples and oranges. What I'm mixing up is land and land.
No. The Rule Book based on international law.
Ukraine, walk with me. Ukraine is defined by land,
yes.
Landmass. Russia is defined by landmass.
Quite true.
So I am mixing up land and land. You agree with that? Good evening. Thank you for holding. You got a half a minute.
Good night, Webbo. Stanley, you believe most everything that comes out of your mouth when you come to St. Kitts and Nevis?
Sure. What comes out of my mouth is...
Because to me, you look like you're fighting against Nevis. Nevis wants something. You telling people that because of the percentage that they had with the and referendum, that is what Nevis people wanted?
I didn't make the Constitution, my friend.
The Constitution you're telling me about, this is not about a Constitution. It has nothing to do with the Constitution, with people voting.
People voted, and they followed what?
Stanley, you know, it was a lot of mishaps with that thing there. With people say they're going to do what they do and they still do opposite. So you know the facts. So I don't know your company radio every...
Listen, I'm not making up anything. For me, I'm not making up anything. I'm just stating...
Stanley, you just make people lose respect for your good.
No. Listen, who wants to lose respect? It's up to them. My thing is to be a realist and we call a pragmatist.
And you have the last word. So this program repeats tomorrow at 10 o'clock following the VON News Minute. Join the Honorable Mark Brantley tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock for On the Map. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. This is your voice in the community, thought that get results. You all have a wonderful evening.
Views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views